Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to today's episode. On June 20th, Canada's House of Commons passed Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act. The bill was created in part to counter tariffs imposed by the United States. According to the House of Commons, the legislation will remove federal barriers to internal trade and labor mobility, helping goods, services, workers, and businesses move freely across provinces and territories, expedite nation-building projects that will connect and transform our country and unleash economic growth while ensuring environmental protections and Indigenous rights are upheld, and working with Indigenous peoples through consultation and engagement to build shared prosperity. So what does this mean for the commercial transportation industry? The Canadian Trucking Alliance has called the bill a wonderful opportunity to address issues that hindered our sector, our customers, and partners within supply chain and economy as well. To delve deeper into interprovincial trade across Canada, we are joined today by Andrew Barnes, AMTA Senior Advisor, Compliance and Regulatory Affairs. Andrew, hello.
Hey, how are you today, Kelsey?
I am very well, thank you. So, Andy, I know you're pretty synonymous with everything AMTA, but can you tell us a bit more about yourself and the work that you do with the association?
Definitely, Kelsey. So I do all of our regulatory as well as compliance and government relations stuff. Really what we do is we look at the industry and we find where the bottlenecks are, like we're going to be talking about today, trade barriers, and then we bring them to the government. And in this case, the government actually approached us because, like you said, Canada had a bunch of tariffs imposed on it, which has drastically changed the industry right now. So this was a great time where we got to address a lot of issues, both with federal, provincial, as well as some municipal things that make things very awkward for the industry. And I think we've got a huge opportunity ahead here for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. And thank you for taking the time today. So let's dive in. From a commercial transportation standpoint, what are some of the biggest issues we're seeing today when it comes to interprovincial trade barriers?
I think some of the biggest provincial issues are things that we've talked about before, but I don't think we've been able to address because we haven't had the opportunity to bring them up simply because we know there's a lot of infrastructure differences between the provinces, there's policy differences, and these are challenges that aren't easy to overcome. We've got bridges that are only rated for so much weight. We've got infrastructure challenges across Canada, different conditions and things like that. And every province is different. And the big challenge is because we're a federated country, every province sets its own rules when it comes to interprovincial weights, policies, and things like that. So we spent a lot of time gathering up these differences. Some of them were pretty straightforward, but definitely after 47 pages of writing and digging into regulations, I learned a lot more than I think I really even wanted to learn. And the challenges really are there. We hear about the big ones on TV, the ones that are sexy. We can't buy wine. We can buy wine from BC, but we can't buy wine from Ontario and different things like that. But we don't hear the challenges when it comes to moving a load across Western Canada or into Ontario with a vital piece of equipment for industry that's overweight, over length, over height, those kind of things. So that's really what we dug into here is a lot of weights, a lot of things around MOUs, infrastructure issues. Again, we even brought up, we're moving towards goal zero when it comes to emissions. That's always the challenge in Canada, and how we're going to deal with those vehicles, as well as some of the less common ones that we'll dig into a little bit here. Even cargo securement popped up strangely. So yeah, it's a wide ranging paper, but because everybody's so open this, and like you said, federally, the Mark Carney started breaking down these interprovincial trade barriers. He gave orders to his ministers, which in turn ran down the food chain down to the provincial level. And now the Deputy Council of Deputy Ministers are actively working and making recommendations to both the provincial ministers and then going up to the federal ministers. So this is one of the few times where we see actively all levels of government working together. And I think this is a huge opportunity for the industry to move forward.
My other question, the 47-page document you're referring to, is that the legislation?
No, actually, that's simply breaking down the legislation and developing charts. So what we did is we brought in all of the regulations around those topics that we did, and we had to explain it in layman's terms, if you would, and kind of lay out the differences for the regulators so that they could understand the challenges that the industry has. So it's not even the regulation. This is just summaries and the challenges, showing the challenges in different charts for the regulators, and really letting them understand in an easy way the problems that exist with different weights between provinces and things.
And so then those topics that you mentioned that were broken down, can you kind of touch on what some of those might be?
Yeah, why don't we start off? I'm going to start off with one that's very common to our members in Alberta, with LCVs. And this is one that we've been working on for a while. And I think we're going to take this one over the line very soon, because I was out at CCMTA in Regina and we had a separate meeting about the LCV Memorandum of Understanding and really aligning it with the Eastern MOU a little bit more. We don't want to take the Western flavor away, but there's certain things that we needed. We need an exemption for brakes on dollies. Another big one that came up is we need a good definition of what adverse weather conditions are, because some carriers go out and challenge roads when other ones are shutting down. And for the safe carriers, that's really not economically fair when other carriers are risking it and traveling on adverse weather conditions. Everything from adverse weather conditions in those to, hey, we now see tritums being used in these combinations, and we need to address that. So that's kind of the first one. And I think we're going to see that one coming across the line right away, because it's already being addressed at the Western provincial level. So I think that one will be coming across fairly soon, Kelsey. So that was the first one. The second one is kind of interesting, and that's differences in overweight and oversized policies across Western Canada. And this one was a bit more challenging, especially for me, trying to learn the different regulations and pulling this all together. I think when we looked at this, we looked at overweight vehicle weights on tandems and tritum axles across Western Canada. We also looked at signage, lighting, escorts vehicles, and some of the differences there between British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, over height conditions, over length thresholds and escort requirements, special permit conditions for extraordinary loads. And those are the loads that we see when it comes to the specialized equipment, whether it's heavy medical equipment, whether it's stuff going up to the oil sands or any of the refineries, or whether it's going to pulp and paper mills. Any of these oversized loads traveling across provincial boundaries have challenges because the weights, the dimensions, the provincial requirements, the regulatory requirements change slightly between the provinces. And even a difference of 3,000 kilograms could mean the addition of using more equipment to haul something between Alberta and British Columbia, which is a huge expense for carriers. One of the interesting things is right at the beginning of this, and a lot of these things came to light because we started down this trade barriers road, and we brought in all of our members that did a lot of travel across the borders. So that's how or the LCVs come up, the MOU when it comes to streamlining that. But then what we really learned was, understanding how this is slowing down progression within the industry. For example, it can take up to 2 or 3 days to move an over-dimensional load between Alberta and British Columbia. In Alberta, you move those loads during the daytime, and in British Columbia, you move them at nighttime. So you might be houred out, required to take a day off and then move that load afterwards. And then we've got the problem of getting permits on time when it comes to some of those loads too. So when we brought our members in and we listened to them, and the costs, the time, the equipment that they're required to purchase that if this can be streamlined would be huge savings for Canada and for companies within the industry across Western Canada. So it sounds like a lot. It is a lot when it comes to those overweight and oversized policies. But I think when we look at this and we look at what's happening at both that federal, again, provincial level, and more of the bureaucratic level, the people that need to make the changes, this is going to take a lot to do. Because right now, we've got 4 provinces or 10 provinces, 3 territories. If we were to try to move this across Canada, this is going to take an enormous amount of infrastructure and money to do. We know we've got bridge problems in Alberta that need to be addressed. The famous bridge in Alberta is the southbound Highway 2 across the Red Deer River. That needs to be upgraded. How come I don't see flags out there from surveyors and things already when they know there's a problem? And the problem is we don't have those infrastructure dollars. So in order to take on some of these challenges, this is where the federal government's going to really have to look and say, how are we going to do this and how is it going to affect different programs? And we'll talk about that a little later towards the end, because we're going to have to make some decisions. And if we make the decisions right, and if the federal government makes the decisions right, where some of this money is spent, we can probably accomplish a few things with kill a few birds with one stone, is the old saying.
So, Andy, you mentioned you were recently at the CCMTA conference in Regina. For our listeners, that's the Canadian Council of Motor Transportation Administrators. And you've been mentioning other provinces, and we've kind of touched slightly on CTA. Can you talk a bit about the collaboration with the different provinces when it comes to this?
Well, the nice thing is, and there was a lot of collaboration, you sit through those meetings and we talk about different things around the National Safety Code and things to improve safety. But some of when you attend these, I can tell you the federal or the Western MOU and having those off the table conversations with the different provinces, that's where a lot of that change is affected, and the misunderstandings and clarifying them up. I know I was pulled away from JAM from BC and there was a misunderstanding around training. And after, 10 minutes of conversations, Kelsey, that's where we see the big value out of these things. Sometimes we go and we hear all of these reports and we spend a lot of the day going through different things that government is working on and then having recommendations from industry. But I can tell you, the conversations over a cup of coffee probably extend a lot farther than most of the day is spent in formal meetings, because we actually straightened a lot of things out there alone. So getting together with the various provincial officials, whether it's Joel from PEI, Janice from Manitoba, all the provinces and territories were there, and just sitting down and understanding the problems that we have. And it goes from them too. If they're having problems with the industry in that area, then that's an opportunity for them to chat with us too. So, it costs a lot to go out there. The memberships are expensive for our carrier members, but this is the kind of positive things and the changes that we see when we start to break down some of these trade barriers and stuff, are those relationships and really working with government. And that's the piece where I think we call the work we do advocacy, and I think it's more of just conversations and working with the friends that we've met over a period of time.
And speaking of those conversations, clearly each province and territory knows where their barriers, their issues for transporting loads, whatever it may be, lie. Kind of what will it take for the provinces to work together and start moving things forward?
I think it's going to take will from the federal government. We see that will. We already seen Bill 5, like you talked about. I've talked about the infrastructure commitment it's going to take. One of the trade barriers that I've identified is road classifications. So in Alberta, we don't even think about that, because whether it's a provincial highway 1 through 99, or what we used to call a secondary highway, it is now simply a provincial highway. So it's actually 1 to 9999. All of those highways have the same weight rating in Alberta. But unfortunately, when you get into some of the other provinces like Saskatchewan, they don't have the strong infrastructure we do. So they have different ratings on different highways. Manitoba is very specific too, as well as BC. So can you imagine trying to haul a load from small town Alberta? You get into Saskatchewan. Okay, you've got to check what classification of road you're on, get special permits if you've got to get to some place like a potash mine to deliver a piece of equipment. So the different road classifications are a huge challenge too. And it even came down to spring weights, the calculation of road ban season. So we're in summer now, road bans are over, we're back to full weights on our overweight loads. But how do you calculate those road bans in the different provinces? And what roads are banned? Where do you look for the information? All of those kind of little things, if they can streamline that, and some of those are small changes. Let's say they put everything on 511 for all the provinces across Canada. Well, we're all going to know where to go then to find this information. But right now it's kind of spread out in different groups, and that's caused a lot of challenges for the industry. So like we've hit 4 of the big topics now that we talked about. We got 3 more to go, but you can see how, like you identify those conversations and the wide group of challenges that the government faces. And unfortunately, a lot of it evolves around money and infrastructure and things like that.
So let's cover those 3 topics, but in that same regard, can we also touch on some of the biggest areas of compliance from a national safety code that is also affected when it comes to these topics?
A great topic to talk about there is, I'm going to bring up cargo securement because that was one I identified. So we all operate under NSC 10, which is the cargo securement requirements for Canada. The provinces adopt that and they put it into their regulations or they reference it. But funny enough, in Alberta, we've had this challenge for the general in-van cargo securement. We have some stricter rules so that things don't shift around or possibly shift around than the other provinces. So in Alberta, where a carrier may have to buy additional airbags and blocking things, it's not required and is not viewed as being required as other provinces. That's another trade barrier, right? So if you're challenged and you're coming from another provinces, coming to Alberta and you're stopped and that's identified as a problem, you may have to go out and purchase things. You're shut down for a period of time. That hasn't been a huge issue lately, but it's one that stands out there, and Alberta's known for that. You know what I mean? So it's little things like that. We get down to, again, let's see. Here's another one that falls kind of in that category when it comes to regulatory challenges, and that's a barrier when it comes to the use of zero emission vehicles. So right now, zero emission vehicles, whether it's a battery electric vehicle, whether it's a fuel cell electric vehicle, or even a dual fuel, meaning hydrogen and diesel, not so much straight CNG, they're slightly a little bit more, but batteries weigh about 4,500 kilograms more than the average Freightliner Cascadia. Let's just call it a day truck. Your hydrogen electric is about 3,500 kilograms more. Your dual fuel's looking around 800 kilograms more. And every time a truck weighs more, because it's energy efficient, it's using a zero emission electricity, that carrier in Alberta isn't given any allowance except on the axle weights. In BC, they're given an extra 1,500 kilograms on the gross vehicle weight. So let's say I'm being really progressive and I go out and I purchase a fuel cell electric vehicle. It's 3,500 kilograms more than the average truck in my fleet. I'm going to have to reduce my payload by that 3,500 kilograms to ensure that I'm legal, right? So we propose that there's a transition period for a minimum of 10 years to allow those vehicles to travel on the roads so that they can phase those in. Now, this brings up the other problem is we've got some huge infrastructure dollars that are going to be required to fix the roads, right? And right now we've got the other problem of how do we get these zero emission vehicles on the highway? How do we incentivize companies? And unfortunately, it's going to have to come down because we just don't have the economics in Canada for everything to be going at once. And I think the infrastructure dollars, I've talked to Robert, our president, about this. Infrastructure dollars right now are probably better well spent on infrastructure. And then we can allow for easier movement to some of these new technologies to move at least. And then we can take a little bit of a slower approach when it comes to the lower emission vehicles. Not that we don't want to slow down and we want to continue on with that change, but maybe we start looking at CNG as a midway technology, right? We can still reduce emissions by 20-30%, well, actually more than that, 30-40% using CNG versus pure diesel. We're not adding any more weights. We're getting our bridges fixed during this whole time and our roads brought up to a higher capacity level so those big overweight loads can come. Then when we're ready and the technology is ready and battery vehicles last longer and fuel cell vehicles come down in price, then we can maybe shift some of that funding over towards them, and we've got the infrastructure to be able to handle that. So it's going to be a dicey game for the federal government. I'm glad I'm not a politician or the Minister of Finance, because out of all these recommendations, we're going to have to seriously look at money and seriously look at the best way to overcome some of these challenges across Canada. And sometimes the biggest challenge is because we're a federated country. And being a federated country, each province gets to make its own decisions. We all have to meet national standards like the MOU for weights and dimensions across Canada, all 16 national safety code standards, but we all set our own provincial regulations. And sometimes even that federated way we look at things is a challenge, because I don't want to change to the Saskatchewan way. And that's not a good example because that hasn't come up, but I hear those things. I've heard it around NSC 7, 14, and 15. How are we going to overcome this problem of different national safety code numbers across Canada? How do we get rid of chameleon carriers if we can't easily access information on carriers across Canada and their information? Do we come up with a national database? Oh, no, we have a much better way of looking at unscrupulous carriers in Alberta, so we don't want to change our way. So being a federated country, coming up with the funds to fix these things, those are the big challenges once we identify all this, that these federal ministers and provincial ministers are going to have to really work hard on solving.
So let's stick with Alberta for a minute. If a carrier is unclear of permits, bans, compliance, etc., what is their best resource to learn more?
I think the best resource to learn more about that is at the AMTA. We've got members to help you out. Myself, Dave Elninski, the member services teams, that's what we're there for. The Alberta government, and sometimes it's just, hey, I want you to Google this. I want you to Google road bans, Alberta transportation. You're going to hit the website, okay? And that's all the advice we need. But we're here, a little bit of Googling. But I think the whole goal of this thing is to pull all of those different regulatory pieces together into one place. I'll give you a good example of someone that's done a really bang-up job, and that's British Columbia. They have what they call their British Columbia Road Transport Manual. And it literally, instead of being a whole bunch of regulations, it just walks you through everything you need to do, all of the overweight issues and things like that. In Alberta, we've got a really great manual for compliance, but it doesn't touch on that piece. So maybe that's all Alberta needs. And then maybe there's one central place for all of Canada where you can access these plain language regulatory documents where you can find things. But the association is always here to help you out too.
So, Andy, we have covered a lot of ground today, but I just want to make sure, is there any other topics or anything related that we maybe haven't covered quite yet?
There's two items that we haven't talked about. I'm calling them infrastructure disparities. And again, it boils down to things that we need to do that unfortunately is going to cost a lot of infrastructure money. The one is I'm going to consider super critical, and that's we have limited facilities for rest stops in Alberta. And this is super critical for our association. If we really want to grow our industry and diversify our industry and bring women and different cultures into our industry, we have to have proper places for people to use washrooms, for security at these sites. We need Wi-Fi at these sites. A great example of this is en route to Ontario. I was just out in Ontario visiting relatives. And you pull into some of these facilities and it's almost like a little town. There's a gas station, a Tim Hortons, a convenience store. The washrooms are clean. Everything from showers and things like that. The public is using them. And they're actually hubs that are really busy. Alberta's quite a bit different from that, but we still need to improve our rest stops. So that's a big challenge. Alberta's been trying to overcome that. But if we really want the transportation industry to move unhampered and with all the regulatory challenges they have, like hours of service, having proper rest stops is critical. And, next to rest stops, things don't slow down in the winter. And one of the things that we want to look at and ask the government to look at is winter road maintenance. And is it standardized as tight as it could be across a province? Are we holding our maintenance contractors to those contracts as tight as we can? Or do we have problems with contracts that we could loosen up to ensure that payments or the roads get cleared a little bit better? I brought this one up, and there's a lot of controversy too, because when you talk to somebody in Ontario, they're going to say their roads are in worse shape than Alberta roads and things like that. But I think when you look at safety in Alberta highways, and we've heard this from many members, things just don't seem to get cleaned as quick as we can. So we're going to talk about that too provincially. So provincially, we've got rest stops, we've got road maintenance, and those are things that, I think the rest stops, we definitely have a challenge in Alberta. The road maintenance could use some touch up a little bit because we've had a lot of bad collisions. I've had calls where carriers can't even travel on Stony Trail down in Calgary. There's certain sections of it are almost impassable after a snowstorm. Myself traveling down to the Edmonton International Airport when down to our office there, that stretch between Edmonton and Nisku is always glare ice. It's like, to me, the worst. And I've been traveling on that highway for more years than I want to admit, because even back when I worked from the government, I was posted out of Leduc Scale. So I traveled from Edmonton down there for 30 some years now. And I can tell you, it's my least favorite road in Alberta, that tiny little stretch. So there's challenges all over, Kelsey, whether it's overweight vehicles, whether it's road classification, spring weights, cargo securement, zero emission vehicles, and how do we encourage people to move into those type of lower emission vehicles? And is there maybe a midway point that we can start at, like with CNG energy, which right now the federal government isn't giving any credits for? Well, just because it isn't zero emission doesn't mean that you shouldn't be giving it some credits towards the heavy vehicle GEM credit system. And I don't want to get into that because it's really confusing. But these policies like overweight policies and even LCVs, these are all things that are in the paper. I can't tell you how many times I've had to research things, write it, use some advanced technology like AI to do some comparisons, learn the hard way that you really need to check things when you're using technology and stuff like that and building this. It literally took, I think, about 3 months to develop this paper where it was good enough to hit the deputy minister. But I think we're sitting pretty solid. I think I know our recommendations are being talked about. If you were to Google Alberta transportation trade barriers, you're going to see their list pretty much matches our list. So the governments are listening. And it's nice to see that our provincial government, the federal government, we're all working together to overcome some of these challenges and take this federated country and really, and I don't want to say unite us, but let's align some of the policies across Canada to make moving goods across Canada smoother and more economical, which will reduce the cost to all consumers in Canada.
Awesome. And thank you for kind of like breaking down and all encompassing all of the stuff that we've covered in the last few minutes here. I just want to touch on too, Andy, you've talked about using AMTA as a resource, our member services team. For our listeners, we will include a lot of links and details in our show notes just to make sure that you have access to all of those resources, whether it be AMTA or beyond, and to access some of the websites and stuff that Andy has touched in today. Andrew, as always, totally respect your knowledge and insight that you were able to share with us. Is there anything that you would like to add as we wrap up?
No, just thanks for having me on the phone or having me on the podcast. I think it was great to be able to talk about this. I want to thank our carrier members. Those are the members that I rely on to tell me what we need to change. I sit through all these meetings. I do the regulatory searches after they're done, but we need to hear from industry, and hearing from you is critical for us. So reach out, go to our webpage, get involved, make sure you read our newsletters. It's super critical because we're here for you. Thank you, Kelsey.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy. So to close up, let's do some AMTA news. Keep an eye out for the details coming soon on AMTA's Driver Appreciation Days, September 8th to 17th. The AMTA Drawdown Dinner is returning. Registration opens mid-July, and we look forward to seeing you this October in Edmonton. And coming up next on Steering Change, we'll be presenting a 3-part series, Trucking, Past, Present, and Future. Join us as we hear from the voices of Alberta's commercial transportation past, what AMTA and industry is up to today, and what industry can expect when it comes to the future of transportation in Alberta and beyond. Do you have any questions or comments about the Steering Change episodes, particularly today? Please do reach out on our Instagram at AMTA_CA or LinkedIn and Facebook at Alberta Motor Transport Association. Stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Did you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.